Have you ever had that strange, eerie feeling that you've been here before? Not in a dramatic way, just a strange sense of familiarity. Like something about this moment feels rehearsed, that you have been here before. You hear the same arguments, see the same tension rise in people's faces, the same kind of headlines, just wearing different names and different dates. And part of you thinks, why does this feel so familiar? Like you walked into a room you don't remember entering, but somehow you already know where all the furniture is. At first, you probably brush it off. Life is messy. History repeats itself. People panic. That's normal. That's the easy explanation. But after a while, the repetition starts to feel too clean, too consistent. Not loud or obvious, just steady. Predictable in the way tides are predictable. A rise, a crash, a distraction, a reset, then back again. And if you slow down long enough to really watch it happen a few times, a quiet thought starts forming in the back of your mind. This isn't random. You can see it most clearly in how your attention gets pulled around. One story takes over everything. Your feed fills up. Conversations narrow. Everyone suddenly has an opinion they feel pressure to defend. Then, almost on schedule, something else replaces it. A new fear, a new outrage. This new crisis, though different in its form, holds the same emotional impact. Different topic, but the same feeling. What's strange isn't that events happen. It's how reliably they follow the same emotional order. Tension, anger, urgency, exhaustion, forgetting. Over and over again. Long enough to keep you focused, short enough that you never really get to breathe or think it through. Like you're turning pages in a book you never agreed to read, but somehow can't put down. Most people sense it in passing, the way you sense a draft when someone opens a door. But very few stop and ask why the air always seems to move the same way. Here's the uncomfortable part. A big reason this pattern works is because your brain cooperates with it. Not because you're weak or because you're naive, but because your mind is built to look for familiarity. Predictable danger feels safer than unpredictable peace. When something follows a recognizable shape, even if it's stressful, your nervous system relaxes just a little and says, I know this territory. I have been here before. Your brain would rather deal with a problem it recognizes than sit with a problem it is not familiar with. Repeated emotions become familiar paths. Outrage becomes routine. Anxiety becomes a schedule. Even chaos, when it shows up on time, starts to feel normal. And once something feels normal, it stops demanding your full attention. You react, but you don't reflect. You feel, but you don't examine. The pattern becomes background noise, not because it's harmless, but because it's familiar. Once something becomes predictable, it also becomes steerable. Attention is easier to guide when emotions already know the path. You don't need to be pushed if you're already leaning. You don't need to be forced if you're already moving in the right direction. A small signal is enough. A headline placed just right. A clip repeated a few extra times. A topic quietly boosted while another one fades into the background. Most of this doesn't feel like control. It feels like choice. You clicked, you watched, you shared. And that's true. But choices don't exist in empty rooms. They exist inside environments, and modern environments are designed. Some ideas are given bright lighting and loud sound. Others are left in the dark where few people wander. No one has to tell you what to think if they can quietly decide what you see, how often you see it, and what emotion arrives first when you do. After a while, the pattern starts to feel less like a series of events and more like a process you are going through. Almost industrial, like an assembly line. Like emotions are being produced in batches, not carefully or thoughtful, but efficiently. Fear in the morning, outrage by lunch, a little hope in the evening, then fatigue before bed. The next day, the cycle starts again with a fresh coat of paint. You can feel it happening inside your own body. Your shoulders tighten before you even finish reading the headline. Your pulse changes before you decide how you feel about it. Your mind prepares for impact before it asks whether the impact is real or necessary. The emotion arrives first. The explanation comes later. And once the feeling is locked in, the story simply builds around it. That's the quiet genius of it. You don't have to be convinced when you're already activated. A nervous system in motion is easy to direct. Anger looks for a target. Fear looks for a reason. And once those are provided, the rest fills itself in. You think you're reacting to the world, but often you're responding to a mood that was delivered ahead of the facts. Over time, this does something subtle to your memory. Each wave replaces the last one before it can fully settle. Yesterday's crisis becomes blurry. Last month's outrage becomes a vague shape. Not resolved, not healed, just overwritten. Like recording over the same tape again and again. New message, same emotional tone. The assembly line never stops long enough for you to ask whether any of it was meant to be permanent in the first place. When you live inside this long enough, it starts to change you. Not in ways that are easy to measure, but in ways you can feel. You get tired in a deeper place, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fully fix. The kind that makes everything feel heavier than it should. And some of that exhaustion isn't just emotional. It's physical, neurological. When your nervous system is exposed to constant cycles of urgency, fear, and conflict, it starts to adapt. Your body quietly shifts into a low-level state of alert. Not panic, just readiness. Muscles stay slightly tight. Breathing becomes shallow. Your heart rate doesn't fully settle. Stress hormones drip into your bloodstream like a slow leak. You're not falling apart, you're bracing. Holding yourself steady in a world that keeps signaling that something is about to go wrong. The problem is, your nervous system doesn't measure danger by truth. It measures it by frequency. Whatever happens often enough becomes the baseline. So after months or years of emotional alarms, your body forgets what calm used to feel like. Rest starts to feel unfamiliar. Stillness feels uncomfortable. And the constant tiredness begins to seem like a personality trait instead of what it really is, a system that never gets the message that it's safe to stand down. Your attention shortens. Your patience thins. Your ability to sit with one thought without reaching for something else slowly weakens. You might notice that silence feels uncomfortable now, that stillness makes you restless, that doing nothing feels wrong, like you're falling behind on something you can't quite name. You may even start to doubt your own reactions. One day you care deeply. The next day, you barely remember why. Important things blur together. Small things feel urgent. The scale gets distorted. And over time, it becomes harder to tell the difference between what truly matters to you and what simply passed through you loudly. None of this happens because you're careless. It happens because constant emotional motion leaves very little room for depth. A mind that is always reacting rarely gets the chance to reflect. And without reflection, days begin to stack up like identical pages. Full, but strangely thin. There's a moment, if you pay attention, when something shifts. Not in the world, in you. You start to notice the timing, the emotional rhythm, the way certain stories arrive right on schedule, pulling the same reactions out of the same places. And instead of being swept into it automatically, you pause, just for a second, long enough to realize, I don't actually have to move at this speed. That pause changes more than it seems. It creates space between the signal and your response, between what appears on your screen and what settles in your body. You begin to feel when something is trying to rush you, when fear is being offered before understanding, when urgency is replacing thought. And slowly, without drama, you step out of line. The pattern doesn't disappear. It keeps cycling. It always will. But once you see it, it loses some of its authority. You stop mistaking repetition for truth, volume for importance, motion for meaning. You start choosing where your attention goes instead of donating it on schedule. And then something deeper happens. You start to wonder why the pattern exists at all. Not just that it repeats itself over and over, but who benefits from it repeating. Not just what you're shown, but what you're never given time to sit with to figure out. Not just how you feel, but why those exact emotions are always the ones being called forward. And once those questions start, they don't stop. You begin to realize how rarely you were encouraged to ask them in the first place. So you keep them going. You question headlines. You question urgency. You question what's framed as normal. You question what you're told is unavoidable. Not with paranoia, not with anger, but with awareness. Because going along is easy. Accepting is comfortable. Following the emotional current takes no effort at all. But questioning, quietly, consistently, that changes how you see everything. It changes what you trust, how quickly you react, or how easily you're pulled into the next wave. You stop assuming that what's loud is important. You stop believing that what's repeated is true. You stop mistaking motion for meaning. Instead of asking, what am I supposed to feel about this? You start asking, why am I being shown this at all? And that's when the pattern stops being background noise and starts looking like a design. Not fully visible, not fully explained, but intentional enough to feel. You may not know the reason yet. You may not see the whole structure, but you can sense that something is operating beneath the surface of events. The world starts to feel less like a series of random moments and more like a system. It is now like you are on a mission. You are no longer living inside it. You are now observing, watching, and questioning it from the outside. Almost like you've stepped into something quieter and deeper. Not panic, not certainty, awareness. That's where the real rabbit hole begins.